Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello everyone, welcome to this session on business cycle which is part of this course. So every economy, be it advanced economy or developing economies, it undergoes several ups and downs. So these fluctuations in economic activity, that means period of rapid economic growth followed by an economic slowdown or even recession are what we call business cycles. They are not random. They follow a pattern of expansion, peak, contraction and recovery, shaping how firms, households and government behave. So understanding business cycles is essential because they affect all aspects of global business environment. For businesses, cycles determine demand for goods and services, investment decisions and hiring strategies. For policymakers, business cycles guide monetary and fiscal responses to stabilize economy. In this session, we will explore what the business cycle is and how we distinguish between boom and recession. And to make this more engaging, we will discuss some conventional as well as some unorthodox indicators of recession, ranging from GDP and inflation trends to some unexpected clues. So by the end of this session, I hope that you will see how understanding business cycle is not only about macroeconomic theory, but also about interpreting real world signals that influence strategy, investment and survival in the ever-evolving global economy. So let me begin with defining what is meant by business cycle. So the formal definition of business cycle is that is the repeated pattern of expansion in economic activity and contraction in economic activity. So overall, these are all driven by fluctuations in gross domestic product, that is GDP, employment and factory income and spending. Overall, the business cycles are not regular or predictable in timing or length. What we can see that we have witnessed for several a business cycle over the period of time. Some of them become more severe, some of them are very mild. And even 1929 Great Depression, you know that lasted for nearly 1 decade. So the key takeaway here is that the business cycles, it can affect both firm strategies, it would affect their production, their investment and also their hiring strategies. And it can also affect the government policy responses, including monetary policy and fiscal policy, and also about the foreign exchange rate policies. Let me show you the different phases of business cycle. So you can see from here, what I did here is that on the x-axis we are plotting time. For example, you can plot it from here 1950 to that clearly here over the year, maybe here for example 2025. So here what you can see, this is the output, the GDP, the production of goods and services produced in a year by a country, the market value of goods and services produced by a country in a given period of time, say for example 1 year. So let us see on the y-axis we plot GDP output or GDP, and over period of time, what we normally expect that economy is growing. Normally we say that economy is growing 10%. That means as compared to previous year output or previous year GDP, this year this country has produced 10% more. That means last year if they have produced 100 billion and this year they are producing 110, then we can see that they are growing at a 10% rate. If that is the case, we expect this actual GDP, this line, this black solid line, it will be moving upward from left to right. But what you can see from this picture, this figure, is that there is expansion in some point of time, rising output. You know that when the output is increasing, then obviously you know that the factors of production also get employment opportunities. That means employment will increase, and so do about the investment as well. The firms will be expanding the size of the factory and they will be producing, investing more in machines and factories. So that is called expansion. And then there is peak. Peak means at this point you can see that here the first peak point is here, another is here over period of time. That means economy at maximum capacity. So then there is a recession. Then you can see that economic output over period of time, it is declining. You can see this is declining and it touching the bottom. That means the negative economic growth, then it become touching the bottom. That is called trough. That means the lowest point where from the recovery begins. So you can see that expansion is like that, then peak, then it comes recession. The recession means the terminology that you often hear. Recession means the decline in economic activity, or in more formally that is the decline in GDP growth. So then it touches the bottom here, that is called trough. Then afterwards, that means when the bottom reach means obviously you know that it may continue for some time, maybe over time it will start increasing. That means this is the recovery phase. Then that means then after certain point of time it start expanding. Again you can see that economy reaches peak. Then what we normally expect that if economy is growing, someone would expect that it will be growing, but after some point of time it's declining. And again this has been plotted based on the actual data. Then again maybe is growing again, but here peak comes here, then again trough, then is growing over time. So this solid black line which I drawn with this red ink on it, this one is the actual GDP, the actual GDP of a country. Then over time you can see that it has been growing. Some countries there is a negative growth. So when we are plotting, you can see that there is a cyclical movement, and this cyclical movement, importantly, this is not in a predictable way. Maybe by seeing this figure you think that maybe I can predict, maybe it's going trough, then is growing, maybe I can anticipate that it will go down, but it's not necessary. See, for example, here there's a trough is there, then it went here, but again after reaching this point it has gone down. So this is the various phases of business cycle. Then you can see this blue line is the trend path of GDP. This is also called as the natural economic growth. That means if there is no fluctuation like that, this economy would be growing naturally because of increase in resources, increase in product technology and productivity. The economy will be naturally growing in this way. So that means suppose this growth rate is for example 2%. So we think that over period of time the economy will be growing every year 2% or 3% like that, is keep on growing. So this one is not the actual GDP, that is based on this blue line was drawn based on the trend line, is a linear prediction that is derived from the actual GDP. By observing the actual GDP, we plot this is the plotted line, that is called a trend line or trend GDP. That means if there is no business cycle or there is no cyclical fluctuations in output, the economy would be moving on its natural path, that is called the trend path or the natural output path. So the trend path of GDP, the trend path here, the blue line, GDP is the path GDP would take if factors of productions were fully utilized, there is full employment. That is also called as natural growth rate. That means all factors of productions are optimally utilized and naturally utilized, and there is no disturbance either from the demand side or on the supply side, then GDP would be growing this one. And always remember, this trend line, this is not the actual GDP. This one is only based on the actual GDP. That is the cyclical line that we are showed here. Based on that, we just project or we make a trend line that is called this natural GDP. So then this is helpful, this trend path, the natural GDP, which we cannot actually observe, but this is helpful to understand in order to measure at which phase we are going through, whether we are at recessionary phase or we are at economic boom phase. So this one is normally calculated here. Based on this, we calculate the output gap. Output gap is the difference between potential GDP and actual GDP. So when the actual GDP, that is the output gap, when the actual, you can see, for example, here, look at this point, for example, this is the potential GDP or the natural GDP or the trend line which I mentioned. Just mention this in case if I didn't highlight, this one is potential GDP or natural GDP, and this one is the peak, this is the actual GDP. So this gap, this is called GDP gap, this distance, and this one, you know that this one is positive. So that means economy is overheating, or that means the factors of production in this country, they are working overtime, or they are producing more goods and services than their natural capacity. So that means that the economy is overheating. That means there is more demand for goods and services. Factories, they are working. Now, suppose if the factory has been working 16 hours, now they are working 18 hours or 20 hours. Or laborers, normally if they work for 8 hours, but now they are working for 10 hours. Maybe there is huge demand, a vast demand for goods and services, and factories see a rising demand and they produce more goods and services. Then the economic activity increases and the economy touches the expansionary phase, right? So this gap, this one is positive, that means there is a positive gap, and this one is you can see the negative gap. This is the potential GDP and this is the actual GDP. This is negative, and this one is called recession, and sometime if it become even further worse, this drop point, even if it goes down further and further, it is called depression. So this one is called negative. Negative means underutilized capacity, that means employment is at risk. So what does mean that? Look at this point here. Normally this economy can produce this much output. Look at corresponding line at the y-axis. So in this particular year, maybe this year you just say 1960. So then normally if all factors of production in the normal economic scenario, they can produce this much output. For example, 100 billion here, just add 100 billion dollar of goods and services. But this period you can see that maybe they are producing now only 20 billion. So the gap here is that 80 billion of the decline in output as compared to their natural output. So that means they are not producing goods and services. The level of economic activity has declined. There is no demand, and overall there will be many people will remain unemployed, and then unemployed, then there is people income would decrease further and further. So this is called the negative output gap. Negative gap is often called as recessionary phase, or that is often a kind of worst scenario for any economy to imagine. So let me also show you the historical output gap over period of time from 1960 to 2012. So these shaded bars shows the major recessions in the US. And these are all the, for example, in 1970, 1975, in the 82, and in 90s, and recently in 2008-9. That is started with the financial crisis, then eventually it led to the economic crisis, the economic recession. So that US being the largest economy in the world, if the US economy goes through a recession, means it has a tremor or implications across the world among other countries as well. Those who are engaging in trade or economic interaction with the US, the other countries also will get affected. So what you can see that this is because of the cyclical deviation. This is showing that this is the cyclical deviation from potential output. So again, you can see that the trend line, here actual GDP is measured with the blue line and the trend line with the black solid line. Then you can see the gap. So that gap, the negative, wherever you see this is the negative gap, and here also gap is there because we are plotting from 1960 to 2010 because of the long time period. So we are not even, if we zoom in this one, then you will come to know this gap more explicitly. So one more feature is that inflation and deflation, it go along with the business cycle. Suppose if there is a boom, that means there is a positive output gap. So then at that time you can see that there is rising prices and inflation because economic activities are high. That means the firms are incentivized to produce more goods and services. That means there is more, if aggregate demand, because of the increase in aggregate demand, if that one is driving the economy, then the firms have more incentive to produce the more goods and services, and the firms will be working overtime, laborers will be working overtime. And if aid is driving the economy, then obviously you know that when the demand is increasing, the topic that we studied in one of the session, that means when there is increasing demand, then the price will increase. So normally during boom period there will be rising prices, and it is accompanied by periods of growth are accompanied by increase in prices. So normally during boom there will be increase in prices. And then during recession means the negative output gap. That means the actual output, observed output GDP is less than the natural GDP. So at that time there is aggregate demand will be less than the normal demand at the normal time. So then it will lead to decline in prices, reduce price, and sometimes there will be inflation at the negative rate. So in general, these are the features. If there is increase in economic activity, normally high GDP will be accompanied with high prices, and low GDP will be accompanied with low prices. However, there is an exception that was in 1970s. That is called a new term, that is called stagflation. It means low GDP, that the GDP is low, but we normally expect that low GDP means the price should be low. But in 1970s there was low GDP but with a high two-digit inflation during 1970s, an economic phenomenon that the economists didn't, or the people didn't observe until then. So overall, looking from inflation from 1960s to 1970s, I'm just showing you plotting here inflation and business cycle. You know that this bar is the recession in the US, and now is plot the inflation. So you can see that this is an empirical evidence. That means what happened to the inflation when this business cycle takes place. So you can see that, however, exception is that the 1970s there is an exception. Other than that, it followed in normally. That means boom means high inflation. During boom there was high inflation, and during recession time there is decline in inflation. There is a low inflation rate. What causes business cycle? This is an important topic for inquiry for economists over period of time. Is never ending list of causes it comes. Once we sometime in general, however, first let me point out what are the general causes. Generally is understood that there will be some kind of demand shocks, consumer confidence, and there will be a credit cycles. Because of that there will be a demand shock. Demand shock, that means a shock on the aggregate demand side of the economy. And similarly there will be some shocks on the supply side. One is oil crisis. For example, in the 1970s, by the formation of the OPEC countries, there was supply side shock because the oil prices increased, and for the firms their cost of production increased. Then similarly there is pandemic like COVID in 2020. You know, there is a supply side shock. Similarly wars, the ongoing wars between Russia and Ukraine, and the other war between Palestine and Israel, that also gives some kind of shocks to most economies. Then comes financial crisis that I will discuss in one of the session in detail. That also causes business cycle. For instance, the 2008-9 recession was the result of 2006-7 real estate crisis, and which paved way for the 2007-8 financial crisis, which eventually led to 2008-9 economic crisis. So that the economic crisis is nothing but the recession that we are currently talking. And then similarly, because of the policy changes, maybe some changes in the monetary and fiscal policy, that also sometimes affect the business activities, the economic activities, that would affect GDP. And sometimes changes in interest rates, sometimes the central bank is following a tight monetary policy. Because of that, the rate of interest increases, and as a result of the increase in the rate of interest, the cost of production for the firms increases. Then it would affect their profit. Then eventually they would reduce the investment, that the expansion of investment in the machines and factories, and that will lead to the economic activities, and also then naturally that would lead to decline in GDP. And similarly, fiscal tightening, sometimes the governments, in order to reduce the fiscal deficit, if the government reduce the spending, and then that also sometimes the aggregate demand, mainly the consumers, suppose their income reduces as a result, and overall suppose if there is a decline in aggregate demand, that also would lead to business cycles. So overall what we see that when the recession or the boom, that means when the aggregate supply is not equal to aggregate demand. You please recall in one of the session while discussing the GDP, and we discussed how using the circular flow diagram, we discussed that aggregate supply and aggregate demand. If aggregate supply is almost equal to aggregate demand, economy is at a stabilizing stage. That means if they produce, suppose the aggregate supply is for example 100 billion, aggregate supply is 100 billion, then you know that by producing 100 billion of goods and services, this would produce equivalent factory income. That means the factors of production also will get 100 billion of factory income, and that will be also spent for in the form of aggregate spending. That means aggregate demand, equivalent aggregate demand will be generated, right? So that means equivalent aggregate demand will be generated. So using the circular flow, what we are seeing that will be spent for buying these goods and services, and then again in the next production cycle, these firms will be producing again goods and services, because equivalent factory income will be generated. But what happened that when this aggregate demand not equal to aggregate supply, then that would create a discrepancy between the economic activities, because what if they produce 100 billion of goods and services, but the aggregate demand out of 100, maybe out of this for example only 70 billion is only spent for buying these goods and services. That means 30 billion is not used here. So that means there will be inventory accumulation. Inventory accumulation means the goods and services that is unsold output is called inventory accumulation. So overall this is the aggregate demand. So as a result, what you can see that if there is inventory accumulation, firms will reduce investment, there will be decline in investment over time. So investment includes not only spending on machines and equipment, but also inventories, like the desired versus undesired inventory accumulation. So if there is aggregate, suppose if the aggregate demand is less than aggregate supply, that means large mismatch is there. Normally what I said that in the short run, some mild discrepancy is fine, that is not a problematic, because we cannot always ensure that aggregate supply should be equal to aggregate demand. But if it continues for a long time, maybe for 1 year, 2 years, then that would create problem. Then there will be inventory accumulation, that means excess inventories, unsold production. So that means the firms will cut back production, and that will lead to a reduction in economic activity by the firms. Then that will lead to unemployment, and gradually economy sinks to recession. So the point which I mentioned, that in the one of that figure here, I have shown the actual output and the potential output. The potential output, what we have shown there is actually based on the observed output. We predicted what would be the natural output or potential output that we cannot observe. So one macroeconomic policy is to keep output as close to potential output as possible. But what is the potential output? Because since we cannot see it, so what we saw here is that in the figure what we are shown is that based on the actual output we draw it. But in a present period, for example, this quarter, we can see the actual output because the GDP figure comes out. We can see this is the actual output, but the potential output we cannot see. Based on the previous year's GDP, we can plot it or we can make a forecast. Suppose without knowing whether we use an expansionary policy above the potential output. Suppose the actual GDP is, for example, above the potential output, that means economy is at the peak. At that time, if we use expansionary monetary policy or fiscal policy, then that means already economy is hit, and then we are spending more and the rate of interest is reduced, then the firms will produce more, then that would cause inflation. So similarly, on the other hand, if policy makers use contractionary policy when the economy is below potential output, they create unnecessary unemployment without realizing that economy is currently ongoing through recession, and at that time if they reduce rate of interest or if they cut down fiscal expenditure, maybe the economy is already contracting, maybe naturally it may bounce back, but at that time, without knowing that actual GDP is less than the natural GDP, then at that time if they follow a contractionary policy, then it will further increase the pace of recession. So then the query here is that how do we know that are we in a recession right now? So in general, business cycle dating committee within the NBR in the US declares when a recession has begun and ended in US. So normally they use GDP decline. These are all the indicators they use: job losses, income stagnation, falling investment. These are all the normally used indicators to know whether the economy is currently ongoing through the recession. Because you need to remember that in the short period, sometime there will be decline in or contraction in economic activity. That we don't call as a recession. That is why the NBR, they study it, observe the economy. If the decline, the contraction in economic activity is so severe, then they finally declare that the economy is currently has been going through a recession for the last 1 year and is currently is going. The NBR will make this declaration. But as I mentioned, we cannot, this will take time. So because of that, economists and policymakers and firms, they often use some unorthodox indicators of recession. So because in the real world, there is an information lag, a delay between a change in the economy and on knowledge of that change. So whether at present the economy is going through a recession or not much easy to really confirm that, but we'll get so many signals that indicates that the economy is going through a recession. One is called R word. R word is the frequency of the word recession in newspapers, media comes up. You know that for the last since COVID or 2 years before COVID, you can see that this word has been widely used across media. That means countries have been going through a recession. So that is one case, especially during COVID time, and this word has been widely used during COVID time. So that means that is one indication for policymakers, firms, and even consumers to see whether economy is going through a recession or not. Another one is called men's underwear index. It's called means that during recession time, households normally cut back on invisible essential. One of the things is that using the sale of companies, those who produce men's underwear, if their sale is declining, that is one indication that currently the economy is going through recession. That means low demand signals weaker consumer spending and lower output in that sector. And the other one is called garbage collection. That is during economic hardship, households reduce the waste. So that means less household waste is generated. That means people buy less and consume less. There won't be any wastage. So normally when the municipalities collect waste and when they are weighing, if at a particular period of time they see that the weight, maybe the garbage they will be recycling, they will be reselling it. So at that time obviously they will be taking the weight of this. And in some particular period of time, maybe 6 months or 1 year, if they see that the weight of garbage has come down, that is an indication the economy is going through some economic hardship. That means economy may be going through recession, but we cannot really fully confirm that economy is going through recession, but maybe a mild recession may be going. Similarly, diaper sales, the declining sales because families postponing expenses or reducing consumption of necessities. Similarly, lipstick index, this is coined by Leonard Lauder. That means in recessions, luxury sales drop, but small affordable indulgence like cosmetics rise as consumers shift spending pattern. So why these matters? Because these unorthodox indicators capture consumer psychology better than the official statistics, as official statistics would take some time and provide real-time clues before the official GDP or unemployment data, and also show everyday behavior that can reflect larger macroeconomic stress. However, this not always perfect predictors, but valuable complementary signals. There are several research on using these unorthodox indexes, and most of the time they show that these have been showing whether the economy is currently going through recession or not. And understanding business cycle, and then this is firms are highly related to that, or when the economy is going through business cycle, it has implications on firms. And during expansion, obviously you know that the investment opportunities increases. During recession, firms go for cost cutting, there will be layoff of workers and lower sales. So at the end, this is strategically important because firm must adapt pricing, production and hiring during this period. And I am showing you some of the major recessions in the US with a tremor across the world. And you can see 1929 to 38, this is called major depression. It lasted for nearly 10 years. The peak unemployment was 25% and the GDP decline was 30% over this period of time. And we'll go through this recession in the next session one by one. Most of the important recession we'll study the magnitude of the problem and also see how what are the policy response, etc. So normally in order to fight against the recession, various economic policies have been used, monetary policy have been used, fiscal policy have been used, and some automatic stabilizers like unemployment benefits, progressive taxes, etc. also have been used. The objective goal here is to smooth the cycle and reduce the extremes and get sometime before the recession itself. If the government is getting a signal that recession is ongoing, is about to come, then at that time itself, as a countermeasure, they will use these policy tools. And in some case, if there is a recession already, then in order to make the economy to bounce back, at that time also governments make use of these economic policies. It has a global dimensions as well. We'll discuss this in detail in some of the forthcoming session. So to conclude, what we saw here is that business cycles, this normally happens, is the natural ups and downs in economic activity, especially the recession. It adversely affects economic growth, employment, inflation and investments. So at that time, in order to fight against it, government use various monetary and fiscal policies in order to smooth but not eliminate cycle, because many a time business cycle occur because of some structural shocks, maybe on the demand side or supply side. So firms must, in this context, firm must adapt and track both traditional and unorthodox signals and accordingly act. Thank you for watching this session and see you in the next session. Thank you.